Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Senate Democrats have unveiled new voting rights legislation. Good thing, because ultimately, if you can't get to the ballot box, you can't make the changes we need. This is called the Freedom to Vote Act. Amy Klobuchar is, I guess, the person who brought it forth. Lots of co-sponsors. Joe Manchin's on it. John Tester, Tim Kaine, Raphael Warnock. Still not going to get to the 60 votes. You're never going to get 10 Republicans to vote for it. So at some point, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and the rest of them are going to have to decide, what do you do with the filibuster? Ultimately, you got to get something accomplished, because Republican states across this country are doing everything in their power to limit the ability of we the people to get to the ballot box. So I'm telling you right now, we need something. We need something to get pushed through. We need to get access to our ballot box and undo some of the damage we've seen in Republican states across the country. And, for me, it's going back and undoing what the Supreme Court did several years back when they got rid of preclearance. Things were working. And then you have the corporate Supreme Court who decided, no, things are just fine. Things are just fine. We're going to let states like Tennessee decide, whatever they want. And what we've seen is a lot of nastiness. Undo some of that, return the ability of the federal government to oversee some of the things the states are doing, and maybe we move in the right direction. Also, some legislation moving in the budget reconciliation side. We're going to start looking at taxing the rich, about damn time, something we've needed to do for a very long time. Good stuff. But today I wanted to start with something that just sent me into an absolute rage. And North Carolina Representative Madison Cawthorn, I'm sure you've seen Madison Cawthorn. He's somebody who he wants attention. So he does the most outrageous things possible to get that attention. And he got my attention today. The other day he tweeted out that he was going to file a bill to gut OSHA. He's going to file a bill to gut the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Because, hey, during a pandemic, who needs to help workers? Who needs to protect people on the job? So as I was sitting, I was thinking about this. I'm going, first, Madison Cawthorn was somebody who's been injured through no fault of his own. A buddy of his was driving. They were driving together somewhere. The buddy fell asleep, smashed into a wall. Madison Cawthorn's paralyzed. This would be like saying, hey, sorry, better luck next time. And not giving you the ability to sue and for damages and to help you lead the life that he's leading. No. Not him. Just workers. Just working people. And, this is one of those things where, I'm sitting here, I'm going, yes, the Republican Party is eating their own achievements, because OSHA was passed in 1970 and signed by Richard Milhous Nixon. This was a Republican initiative to protect working people. Not to mention, again, Nixon would be unrecognizable in this party because he passed the EPA too, something that Republicans have been trying to gut for decades. And look, I'm not surprised by any stretch of the imagination that there's a Republican out there willing to abuse the power of government to weaken labor standards. I'm not surprised at that at all. And I'm not surprised that they would want to make much more dangerous working conditions. Go back to the last administration and how they gutted the number of inspectors that were out inspecting workplaces. Go back and look at the last administration who did nothing to protect people in the workplace. Not surprising. Now understand, this is the party who believes in no rights at work. These are the people who believe in the what I call the no rights at work agenda. The ability to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions. Absolutely not. We want as dangerous as conditions as possible. And what they're doing is they're pushing this so-called right to work, which has no rights, no work, no value for working people, but power for the bosses. They want to do away. Look what they did with unemployment compensation insurance. First thing they did is they wanted to take that away. They wanted to destroy it. They wanted to weaken it. Some states actually cut the number of weeks down. I think Florida at one point was like 12 weeks. You go through the list of things that protect workers' compensation, prevailing wage laws. Don't get me started on the Fair Labor Standards Act that they've been against since 1938. Minimum wage, overtime laws, child labor laws. Remember back when Newt Gingrich was still, talking about running for president and said, what we need to send those kids who are going to school. We need to get them to clean the bathrooms before school so we can fire those janitors and teach them value. But we're just going to do it with poor kids. We're not going to do it with the rich kids. No, we can't do that. But it got me thinking today that we're in a moment where the Republican wants, things that they've been dreaming about, their wet dream list, is now within grasp. And this tweet by Madison Cawthorn to Gut Osha just is like the cherry on the top of this. Because OSHA is the organization that is supposed to make sure that our workplaces are safe. They're the ones who are supposed to hold companies accountable for dangerous workplaces. Now, granted, we're at the lowest number of inspections they've probably ever been at. They've conducted the fewest number of inspections over the last term of any administration in history. And look, the Biden administration's trying. They're trying to ramp things up. But it just doesn't happen with the snap of fingers. So now you've got Cawthorn going, we're going to defund it. We're going to gut it. And that's what they want. They want to deregulate everything so we can return to desperation. The ultimate goal of the Republican Party has always been to return the nation's workers to poverty, to turn the nation back over to the owners, the owners who owned the workers and the workers who were compliant. Desperate, afraid to speak up, fearful they'd be blacklisted and their families ostracized, poverty, desperation. And it was out of weakness that they swallowed their pride, accepted their lot in life, and kept their heads down so they could keep feeding their kids. This is where they want to take us back to. They want to return us back to the good old days of the Lochner era. The good old days of liberty of contract. And you go, Rick, what are you talking about, Lochner era? In this country, the Supreme Court had decided the Lochner era is from about 1897 to 1937. It's the time when the Supreme Court ruled that any infringement on a contract between an employer and an employee was a violation of your constitutional rights. The 14th Amendment guaranteed you the right to be able to enter into a really bad agreement. And it started back in 1897 because there was a case out of Louisiana where the state legislature in Louisiana said, you know what? We don't think insurance companies, these maritime insurance companies, should be able to cheat our citizens. They should have to have an agent in the state. So you should have some roots in the community so that if you do cheat us, we can come get you. Well, the Supreme Court said, well, that's a bridge too far. And they ruled that meager legislation, which was to prevent fraud, they ruled that unconstitutional, citing liberty of contract. You should be able to be cheated whenever you want to. You fast forward to 1905, the state of New York passes the New York Bake Shop Act that limits the number of hours a baker can work in the baking industry in New York. Limits it at 60 hours. Now, this guy, Joseph Lochner, who owned a bakery, a couple of times got caught violating it. He was fined. Took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. You're right. You can work your workers as long as you want. You can have them work in the most unsanitary conditions, in the most desperate conditions. Look, because if they're desperate enough, if their kids are hungry enough, if their family's deep enough in poverty that they'll work for desperation wages and horrible conditions, that's their liberty. Thus, liberty of contract. And that they upheld that all the way until 1937 when the West Coast Hotel versus Parish case came up. What is commonly known as the stitch in time to save nine, because at the time, FDR was talking about packing the courts with people who would move through his New Deal agenda. Part of that being minimum wage laws, maximum hour laws, child labor laws, protections in the workplace, rights on the jobs for workers. Oh my goodness. How dare he? What radical thoughts. You know, the things that we take for granted today, the things that we think were, oh my gosh, who could possibly be against the minimum wage? The Republicans. Who could possibly be against overtime after 40 hours? Republicans. Who could possibly be against safe working conditions, Rick? Madison Cawthorn and the Republicans. Who could possibly want to put children back into the mines and the factories? Do I need to answer that? Our friends in the Republican Party. And this is what they've always wanted. They've always wanted to return us to this liberty of contract, only they use a different word. It's now freedom. You should have the freedom to be cheated at every turn, which is why we've got so many gig workers. Because it's your freedom to make a bad deal. Look, most gig workers I know, they want a job, man. They want to be able to support their families. They want to have some say. But corporate America, with their power, with their money, their influence, and a well-paid-for Supreme Court, are moving us back in this direction. The legal thoughts in this country right now, thank you, Federalist Society, thank you, Chamber of Commerce, thank you, state policy networks of think tanks all around this country who have been sowing the seeds of poison into the minds of workers going, yes, I should be able to make my own bad deal. How dare you tell me I can't work 100 hours a week at straight time? Well, we as a working class have said that we don't want to live simply to work, that our labor is how we support our families. And there should be some parameters there. Every step forward that the working class has ever made in the history of civilization has been because of the labor movement, because of organizing, because of workers coming together and standing in solidarity and demanding in the face of the court system that from 1897 through 1937 was decidedly against them, was decidedly sticking them in the back at every turn and making life desperate. You know, I tell the story all the time of a guy I worked with, back like 30 years ago. He said when he got back from Vietnam, they gave him a little bit of money when he got out of the Army. And he came back to central Pennsylvania and paid the company store what his parents had owned them for decades. And it was the first time in the history of his family, who had been here like 100 years, the first time in the history of his family that they weren't indebted to the company store. Because that's how much power these companies had. You had to buy things from the company store. You had to go to the company doctor. You had to live in company housing. They had you by the short hairs at every turn. And there's a movement in this country right now, led by our friends in the Republican Party, and some of them are dupes. Some of them have no idea what I'm talking about. Some of them have no idea. They think, no, Donald Trump was a pro-labor guy. Even though every decision he made while he was in office was to make unions weaker, to make the ability for working people to collectively bargain that much weaker, to tear down the ability to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. And the Madison Cawthorns of the world and all of the hey, look at me Republicans who are just looking for attention, they're pushing it too. And I will give Madison Cawthorn the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't know anything, that he's completely ignorant of what OSHA is, what it does, why it exists, and who it protects. I'm going to give him that he's just ignorant. Because to him, this is just about the attention that it's going to get him. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to help people be in much worse conditions. And the question I come back to, if not our government, if not OSHA, who will protect workers in the workplace? We've seen through history what happens when desperation workers are stuck in a situation where employers have all the power and all the control. We have seen what's happened. And sadly, in this country, we don't learn our history. Labor doesn't have history in this country. We learn the history of the captains of industry, how wonderful they are, how they built the country. You never hear the stories of the hundreds of thousands, the millions of people who died on the job in factories and in mines and in every industry across this country. You never hear that. No. That would mean that the captains of industry just used and abused average everyday working people like you and me, used us up and shoved us off to the curb to be dealt with like trash. That's a difficult reality to come up with. It's much easier to think, no, they're all benevolent employers. My employer's different. And the reason that you may think that is because as of today, workers still have protections in place in law. OSHA still is here, gutted, weaker than it's been probably in my entire lifetime, but still here. This to me is a moment where I reach out to my working class Republican friends and look, we can disagree on a lot of issues, but this is one of those that there should be no disagreement on. We want safe working conditions. We want decent wages for workers. We want good benefits. We want to go home in the exact condition we went to work in. And if something happens, heaven forbid something happens, we need to hold someone accountable, especially when they're negligent. We're in a moment right now where it seems like nothing is off base for these folks. There's no depth that they're not willing to go just to score their cheap Twitter points. And that's really, and again, as I said, I'm going to give Madison Cawthorn kind of a pass because he's stupid. This was just about scoring cheap Twitter points. But by pushing that, he has stepped into a much larger frame, a much more dangerous area than just, hey, I trolled the libtards. These are people's lives. This is their health. These are millions of workers across this country. And he's willing to say, you know what? The heck with you. I scored my points. And that's all that matters. It's terrible. It's despicable. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
More American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1917.
That was the day Illinois Governor Frank Loudon hoped to meet with striking streetcarmen in an effort to end their strike. Transit workers in Springfield, the state's capital, had been off the job since July 25th. But the strike had gained so much support that Springfield had now erupted into a full-blown general strike. According to the Sangamon County Historical Society, thousands of union members shut down mines, railroads, bakeries, restaurants, laundries, and construction sites following the violent crackdown of a pro-labor march by state police and militia. The march had been scheduled for September 9th. The union hoped to show support for the striking streetcarmen after a number of clashes between strikers and state militia. After they were denied a permit, many of the 50 or so unions decided to march anyway and were attacked. Some were shot. More than 40 suffered bayonet-inflicted injuries. By the 11th, most everyone in Springfield had walked off the job. Striking women shoe factory workers stopped a streetcar, pulling the scab drivers off by force. By the end of the week, as many as 12,000 members of 34 unions in the city were on strike. When telephone operators walked off the job, they paralyzed communications of the scab streetcar drivers and the state National Guardsmen. The streetcar strikers refused to meet with the governor until troops were withdrawn from the city. The governor insisted disloyal, pro-German forces were at fault for the labor troubles. By the 16th, the streetcarmen agreed to negotiate and the general strike was called off.
but the company refused to meet striker demands for recognition and higher wages, or even take them back.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, I'm still just completely flipping mad over this Cawthorn thing. And I think my response is the right one. I think he's just too dumb to realize what landmine he stepped on and how dangerous this could be. But I also think the other side of it is I don't think he actually cares. And for me, that's the most scary part of all of this, is that he doesn't. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on maybe a little bit on this Madison Cawthorn tweet that has me all riled up, and also, hey, look, we need massive investment across the entire country, especially in a state like West Virginia. And you got Joe Manchin, who seems to be doing everything in his power to ensure we get nothing. That's why I've asked Justin Williams to come talk with us. Justin is an attorney for the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 132 in West Virginia. They represent workers throughout the United States and Canada. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start with this Madison Cawthorn thing that just. Am I reading too much into this? Am I taking this too far? Is this just a guy who's stupid and didn't know what he did? Or is this really, like I've been thinking, this is a much bigger situation that the Republican Party hell-bent on taking us back to the good old days of the 1880s and 1890s?
I think it's sad, really, that somebody would want to take us back to that. Being from West Virginia, where we're 100 years from Blair Mountain, this just last week or whatever. And so where people had to fight literally with our own government to protect their interests at that point. And it was, like you were mentioning before, just very little company stores. And so for someone to take the last line of defense, and that's kind of what I think OSHA is, the last line of defense for workers, right? I mean, it's the bare minimum protections, right? They're not going above and beyond to protect workers. They're just saying, this is the minimum. You have to do this as an employee or an employer to protect your employees. And employers still don't do that. They still don't protect their workers, particularly, where there's not representation by a union who aren't willing to fight for the workers' rights or safety and welfare of their workers. And so, it's just sad that someone would think about working class people that way.
But again, I'm going to stick with he's just stupid and didn't really think it through. But ultimately, this still is the Republican platform. But I look at West Virginia, and I'll be honest, West Virginia is one of those states that has a rich, long, bloody history with workers. And, in 2013, we did a labor history tour that took us right through Logan County to talk about the Battle of Blair Mountain. And we were met by a welcoming crew. The Friends of Coal showed up with their big hats, their belt buckles, their sidearms, and of course their bumper stickers, Friends of Coal this, Friends of Coal that. And sadly, a number of them were actually being screwed over by the coal companies as we were speaking, trying to take their health care and their pensions, but they were still out there defending them. And it's just a twisted kind of moment. It was a twisted kind of moment for me.
It is. It's hard. And we see it in not only West Virginia, but across the country, people, I'll say voting in that bigger sense of the word against their best interest. Right. And so, we talk about Friends of Coal, but we also talk about Friends of Coal Miners, and that's really what labor has been, the friend of the coal miner, and that's what we look for, to protect those workers. As you mentioned, when they're still trying to take their pension to this day by, using the bankruptcy courts, and it's just a sham of what these companies have done to these workers.
And just to clarify, so we don't get these terms confused.
Sure.
The UMWA, the United Mine Workers, they are the Friends of Coal Miners. The Friends of Coal are basically a lobby group for the coal barons and the corporations who give out stickers and hats and T-shirts and organize people because, hey, they're coming for our coal because the Green New Deal is going to end coal mining in a state like West Virginia. And I'm at this place, Justin, where Coal is sadly a thing of the past. We're not going to continue to burn it like we did in the past. The future is renewables. And if I'm Joe Manchin, if I'm somebody in West Virginia, I want to use what leverage I've got to get all of those jobs to replace the coal mining jobs so that people don't have to die of black lung. They don't have to have families go down, 3, 4, 1,000 feet into the ground just to make a living. This seems like an opportunity for West Virginia in an enormous way to remake their economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think West Virginia has to do all of the above, right? We as a country can't go away from coal mining tomorrow
Nope.
and coal production and power usage. And so, I think it has to be a well thought out plan. And I think sometimes we get caught up into the politics of it on both sides of it, and I think we have to, make sure that we're looking out for the workers, right, first and foremost, and making sure that the coal miners, the people that do the construction on the powerhouses, our guys that go in and work on it and do the shutdowns, are able to keep those jobs and have good jobs and build renewables. We're lucky the operators have been a part of every windmill built in West Virginia. And so, we are proud of that work. And, if you go to our website, you'll see a video about the windmill project that we work on currently. We're working with the solar developers in West Virginia as well. So it is West Virginia needs it all. As we're all well aware, we sit at the bottom of most of the good rankings and the top of most of the bad ones. So we want to make sure that our workers are protected and
Absolutely.
they have the opportunity, right? And there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think taking this infrastructure bill and investing in it gives us that opportunity. And so that's really what we're hoping for, is that there is some of that real investment in West Virginia.
Yeah, but I watched Joe Manchin over the weekend doing all the Sunday shows. He's not going to do this. He's not going to do that. Not going to allow this to happen. It seems like he's trying to do everything he can possibly do to restrain our ability to invest in the future, and especially in a state like West Virginia. So, is it just me, or should the folks in your state be going, "Hey, Joe, you should be working to bring things home"? There used to be a phrase called "bringing home the bacon." You should be bringing home some bacon, Joe. We need better roads and bridges. We need better opportunities for our workers, but we also need the human infrastructure stuff, better education for our kids, better health care for our seniors, better opportunities to move the state and the country forward. That to me seems like where things should be going in your state.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the end goal for the people of West Virginia. What I can say for the operators is that we have to, start with something, right? And we don't get to the end game by getting nothing, right? So, as much as we have great conversations and good relations with Joe Manchin, and we would love to have more, right? Everybody wants more, but we really want that investment now in the infrastructure that has passed the Senate, and nobody agrees on anything all the time, but we do need that infrastructure in West Virginia, whether it's, the Virgin Hyperloop that's in that bill that's going to build a test center in West Virginia. And there's money in there for abandoned coal mines, and there's money in there for energy and safety and pipelines. And so there's a lot of money out there coming to West Virginia that we need desperately now. And, the hope is that all of this comes down the pipeline at some time, but we really need that investment now for West Virginia.
My fear from the beginning, and this is, I don't know if you'll share my fears or not, but my fear from the beginning is that you're going to have someone like Joe Manchin, someone like Kristen Simina, who are going to say, no, we can't spend the $3.5 trillion on the human infrastructure side. That's completely out of control. And Manchin has said that. He said, maybe 1 trillion, maybe 1.5, which is not going to be palatable to the more progressives in the House. So my concern is they're going to end up canceling themselves out, and that by the end of this year, we get nothing. And that to me is the worst possible option, the worst possible outcome. Do you share that fear?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the biggest fear, is that we get nothing, right? I mean, that's kind of, as pragmatic as it sounds, what passed the Senate has bipartisan support and there's an appetite for that. And that's what I think, I know it doesn't include all that, personal capital, human capital infrastructure, but if we can put people to work in West Virginia, that helps immensely just on day one. and the other things that come along after that, I think would be beneficial to working class people here too. And just having those jobs is important. Getting the opportunity to have a road that's connected to the next section of the highway. They're finishing up part of Quarter H, which goes from the middle state out towards Virginia and DC. And if that would connect, it would cut time off for transportation to get materials in and out of West Virginia. So it would be an opportunity to develop a new, manufacturing facility. And that's what we talk about, bringing manufacturing jobs back to West Virginia, actual growth, right? And so there's some steel mills that are here working on windmill parts. And so we need that investment now. And that's a big fear that, when we bicker over $1 trillion versus $3 trillion, which seems crazy to, someone like me who just goes to work every day, that we're arguing over trillions of dollars, that we have to get that investment now.
Yeah, I'm with you. We do need the hard infrastructure, but I also agree with the progressives that we do need to undo the last 40 years of the attack on the social safety net in this country, because it's my view that the anger that we're seeing in society is the fact that, a generation of working people my age and a little bit older were told that if you work hard, you played by the rules, you were going to lead the American dream, you were going to retire with some dignity and respect. And they've gotten to these years and they're going, it didn't happen. We lost our defined benefit pensions because companies were able to steal it. They promised us these 401ks that never quite panned out. And now there's nothing to help us. And this is a way that, some of the progressives have said, look, we're going to pass this bill through the House to help maybe buoy people up a little bit. So I kind of see it on their side too.
Sure. I mean, I think they have a lot of valid arguments for that, soft infrastructure. I myself have a family and kids, and so my working wife as well. So like we have a 2 household working, and it's a lot when there's child care issues, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. So I think those are all valid concerns, but going for what my members do every day, get up and as you were talking about before, the people that actually build this country, they need that hard infrastructure dollars, yesterday really, and we need that investment, and so that's what we're trying to do.
Don't disagree with that, but you got to understand there's leverage points.
Oh yeah.
And this is my fear. My fear is that one side's not going to blink, and we're going to end up playing chicken and end up smashing into each other and get nothing. That's my fear. So when you're talking to your members, when you're talking to people in your state, what's the sentiment now? Is it we just want the hard infrastructure and we don't really care about anything else? Is it that there's a need for both? What kind of response are you getting from folks?
No, I mean, I definitely think there's a need for all of it, right? It's people want, I think they've seen what can pass the Senate, and they've seen, in the grand scheme of, they see a bill pass the Senate and they think, oh, okay, it passed the Senate, we're moving it, let's go, let's take this money, kind of not really seeing it. And it got all the press, right? I mean, it was on the news, Manchin, Capito, they're pushing this infrastructure plan, and we're going to build bridges and roads and all that. And so, people now, they expect that, particularly here in West Virginia, because, both of our senators were the kind of the center point of those conversations back and forth for the last 3 months. And so, the other conversations are happening out there, amongst groups, all over the board. And so, but, I hear from my members, especially, that, the hard infrastructure is what they need. And that's just because that's what they do every day. That's what they know. And so that's what they're focused on.
We all want our jobs, man. We all want to make sure we can get up and go to work in the morning, and that those jobs, pay a decent wage and all of that. And one of the things that I'm actually surprised about is that Republicans didn't really push to take prevailing wage out of the $1.2 trillion hard infrastructure plan. Now they did screw over the workers in the telecom area, because that's outside of all of that. But for the most part, the roads, the bridges, all that stuff, I was surprised they left the prevailing wage in.
Yeah, I mean, we were excited about that. And that was, one of the big conversations that we had with Senator Manchin and with Senator Capito, in conversations. And we're lucky that they both have been, pretty good allies on that issue, of the Davis-Bacon, particularly wages on those federal projects. so we're excited that it stayed in there, and that's a great for workers across West Virginia and across the country for that matter.
Yeah, I would hope they would stay in there, because your own governor came out and said gutting prevailing wage doesn't work, passing the no rights at work nonsense, that doesn't work. None of the right-wing playbook actually works, but they still passed it anyway. So since Jim Justice came out and said that we right to work didn't bring jobs in, ending prevailing wage didn't bring jobs in, none of the tricks and ponies that the Republicans pull out actually helped. Did they go back and undo any of those things?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. There have been some conversations, and we're talking to a lot of our friends who are friends of labor, both on the Republican and the Democrat side here in the state. Our state legislature is a little different because it was Democratic for so long, and now it's Republican majority like a lot of places. But there's a decent amount of Republicans who are friends of the working class, we'll say. They're not necessarily all pro-union, but they're still understanding of our issues, and we're working on those every day. But it was a gift when the governor said that, just to reassure what we all knew, that they didn't work, they didn't bring jobs, but what has actually brought jobs is our members doing good work for companies that are relocating to West Virginia.
No, but here's the thing. I believe Jim Justice and the Republicans knew that none of that stuff was going to work anyway. It was just on their wet dream list that they had to go forth and do to make their donors happy. At least that's just my take on it. Last line of questioning I've got for you. As you said a moment ago, the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Blair Mountain happened, where literally 1 million shots were fired in this labor war. You had the employers dropping bombs on the head of striking workers. This history is something that is never told, never taught in our schools. In fact, most people didn't even know it was the 100th anniversary. How do we move that messaging forward? How do we get that message out, do you think, in a better way?
That's a great question. A few years back, when Dems were still in charge in West Virginia, they did pass a labor history week in West Virginia, and it is part of our curriculum in West Virginia. But across the country, I think we have a real opportunity to talk about labor. You see all the polls where public and society do support unions, right? I think we just have to do a better job of talking about why people still say, oh, well, we don't need unions nowadays. But we see it every day, whether it's here in West Virginia or in Alabama with Amazon workers, or, wherever the case may be, there are people who are being abused by their employers. And, I think that comes full circle all the way back to the OSHA stuff. I mean, if we're not tracking these bad employers with OSHA fines and violations, we don't know who they are, and they're just going to scapegoat. So we have to be able to hold them accountable while protecting our workers, and show the rest of the country that we are here to protect your rights and fight for your rights and make for a better working class people.
There you go. Justin, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Thanks. I really appreciate it, Rick.
Good stuff. Justin Williams. He's an attorney for the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 132. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. Where working people come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1929. That was the day that Ella Mae Wiggins was gunned down on her way to a rally of striking textile workers in North Carolina. Ella Mae was born in the mountains of Tennessee. Her father was a lumberjack who was killed on the job. She and her brother had entered the textile mills to help support their family. She married another mill employee, and they had 7 children. When her husband left, Ella Mae struggled to keep her family afloat. When the Great Depression came, textile mill workers were subject to the, quote, stretch out. Owners demanded that fewer workers quicken their pace to produce the same results. In response, textile workers began to organize and strike in Gaston County, the heart of the southern textile industry. Ella Mae became a local leader of the National Textile Workers Union. She advocated for organizing both white and black workers. She became known for leading the other workers in song. One of her most poignant songs was the Mill Mother's Lament. The lyrics told her personal struggle of a mother trying to support her children. On the day she was killed, Ella May was in a truck heading to the workers' rally. They were met by an armed mob deployed by the mill owners. The unarmed workers turned their truck around, but the mob chased them and gunned down Ella May. 5 people were charged, but they were acquitted of her murder.
We leave our homes in the morning, we kiss our children goodbye. While we slave for the bosses, our children scream and cry.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Our grocery bills to pay, not a cent to spend for clothing, not a cent to lay.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm thrilled to see that the administration is pushing some incentives for people to buy some electric vehicles. And look, I would love to be able to get an electric vehicle at some point. At this point, little out of my price range, even with some of the incentives. But if I were to have gotten one, and I had looked at the Tesla, and then quickly turned to the side because of all of the horrible things that I've heard that go on in their factories and their treatment of their workers. But for me, if the auto companies start building electric vehicles here, union-made electric vehicles, there's no reason I won't buy one. There's no reason I think American workers won't buy them, especially if we see the kind of incentives that are coming out of the White House's plan. Again, good policy. And here to share some thoughts on this good policy, I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is good to be with you as always.
So the car companies, Toyota, Tesla, the non-union, some foreign, they're really ticked off that the Biden administration has put this little caveat in that we're going to give a little extra to car companies that make electric vehicles and their workers have union rights. And I got to tell you, I don't care what they think.
Right. And the important thing to know, Rick, about this is that it's not like that buyers of those vehicles wouldn't get any tax credit. They would. But buyers of these electric vehicles that qualify, that are made by firms that provide prevailing wages, would get an additional tax rebate. Beyond that, it would go up from $7,500 to as high as perhaps $12,500 if the battery is also made in the United States.
Right.
So, your decisions have consequences, right? If you want to try to bust unions or keep them out of your factory, or if you want to source more of your parts from overseas, there'll be less of an incentive for consumers to buy that car if what they're looking at is the tax rebate for doing that. And I think this is one good way to jumpstart the demand for electric vehicles, because there still is a bit of what we call a green premium, right? It costs a little more to make these cars. The battery technology is super expensive, but Ford, GM, the union automakers in particular, have announced more models that are going to come online over the next couple of years, many of which are going to be made in the United States in union shops. And so let's prime that pump a little bit and get it rolling. So I think it's a great idea, and it speaks to our values, that we value better paid work. And companies that are that have a strong record with respect to the right to organize, and that are making more of their products or sourcing more of their parts for the electric vehicles, particularly the battery, from the United States itself.
Yeah, and there's a simple solution to this. I mean, Toyota came out with a statement, said it's blatantly biased. Well, we can fix that. let your workers organize, pay them a reasonable wage, and we don't have those problems. See, for me, this is the smart policy that I wish we'd been passing for years, incentivizing rising tides that don't smash workers into the dock. To me, this seems like a smart policy, one that I'm actually fairly grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. And so the House Democrats, it's part of their Build Back Better budget reconciliation package, which I expect to pass through that committee and then onto the floor of the House of Representatives. We, as you know, still have work to do in the Senate. That will be very important. But it's also, I think it's worth noting that Senator Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, has been a longtime supporter of focusing that electric vehicle tax credit on vehicles that are made in the USA. And so I think that there'll be broad support for this proposal in the Senate as well. And again, it's not like you would not get a tax rebate for buying a Toyota that's an electric vehicle. It just wouldn't be as generous as it would be for buying the vehicle that is made by workers who were paid a decent wage.
Right. See, I would argue that that's kind of leveling the playing field. I mean, if you're creating these cars in places that have depressed wages, this is kind of the leveler, because we want high wage jobs. We want people who, I mean, I hate to bring Henry Ford into this, but we want workers who are going to be able to buy the products that they make. Yeah. This seems like, I don't know, common sense.
Yeah, it's totally common sense. And we have an enormous untapped market for EVs, and particularly with car makers starting to respond to Americans' desires, as you know, Rick, to buy SUVs or all-terrain vehicles. You're going to see more of that, and particularly as the battery technology gets better and better and it gets lighter weight and extends ranges. There's going to be greater interest in doing this, and we're playing catch up. I mean, we need to build this market fast. And here's what I don't want to have happen, and I think this is the important thing, is that as we make this transition, which will inevitably happen, we shouldn't replace the internal combustion engine with made in China electric vehicles. We should just not do that. And so having a policy like this that's geared towards cars that are made in the United States, I think is an important step on that journey.
No, I'm right there with you. Because look, I recently bought a new Jeep Wrangler, and
Jeep, yeah,
and I love it. It's one of those dream things I've always wanted from the time I was a little kid, and now I'm thrilled to death with it. The problem is even still, it's still got a lot of foreign-made content. It was assembled in Toledo, Ohio. I like I said, I love it, but the supply chain, still a lot of foreign parts. I was looking at the Ford Bronco made in Mexico. I was looking at the Escape that they've got, built here in the U.S., but of Chinese components. So I'm looking at this stuff and I'm going, how's the best way to reshore some of our manufacturing so that our supply chains are here? Because a lot of auto companies are going, gee, we just can't get the chips and the parts that we need because they're made somewhere else. To me, this seems the perfect opportunity. This crisis is the perfect opportunity to reshore our manufacturing, to reshore our supply chains, and to make sure that I can buy a car that's better than 80% American content. And I know it sounds nationalistic, but the reality is I want my neighbors to have jobs too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing kind of jingoistic about it. It's about, if you believe in a sustainable economy and you believe in supporting local communities, it does make sense to buy local. Absolutely. And so there's a couple of ways that we can accomplish that, and we can get more of those Jeeps and Fords and GMs and other cars to have higher U.S. content instead of lower U.S. content. Again, one is through these tax incentives to gear them the right way. And so if you're buying a car that has a U.S. battery in it, you get a bigger tax incentive. I think that's a good thing. The second thing we can do is to make sure that our trade agreements reflect that, if it says should mean made in America,
right.
Not 50% made in America or 60% made in America. And so the USMCA, the relatively new trade agreement we have with Mexico and Canada, does elevate that percentage up quite a bit for North American content, and we need to build on that. I think that is also quite important. And then the third way we can do that is through our procurement policy. The government is a big buyer of vehicles, and in fact, it will buy a lot of electric vehicles, from school buses to cars that are needed in the various departments over the coming years. And it can set the standard and say, we're only going to buy vehicles that are made by labor with prevailing wages and that are 60, 70, 80% or higher U.S. content. And the car companies will want to respond to that. And so there's a lot of levers that the Congress, that the administration can use, some of which are already being used, but we need to crank them a little more, and we'll see that progress.
Yeah, we desperately need it. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. AmericanManufacturing.org is their website. We'll make sure we get links out on social media on how you can check out the work that they do. Now, recently there was a panel convened by the U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission. And one of the statements that came out of that is, we got to stop doing business in China. Corporate America has got to just stop, get off the drug, basically. Stop with the cheap labor, lax environmental regulations. Get off the CEO heroin, and stop doing business there. Is that possible?
Yeah. I mean, it will take some time, honestly, because look at the shelves of any store, Rick. Right? So it's not something that will happen overnight, but it does need to happen. And it also doesn't mean, and I think this should be very clear, that all of that work is going to come back to the United States. Some of it will inevitably go to some other countries as well, but those other countries aren't going to be building up their militaries, threatening their neighbors, and acting in nearly as an authoritarian fashion as the Chinese Communist Party does. And I think that's one of the important things. And so these experts, and I thought this was really fascinating, it's not like we need to set different rules. It's basically U.S. companies, particularly manufacturers, should unwind their operations in China as quickly as possible, because there is just too much risk associated with that. There's the theft of technology risk. There's the risk, again, that our supply chains aren't as resilient, that we lose some capacity here. And that we're also potentially building up a strategic competitor at the same time. And so I think these words were chosen very carefully, and they're very powerful. And if you look at what's happening inside of China, basically Xi Jinping is president for life there, and he's consolidated control of the Chinese Communist Party. And he's making it far more nationalistic, and they have expansive notions in the Indo-Pacific region. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that we need to think about a shooting war with China or anything like that, but we do need to be smart about our economic policies, about our human rights policies, and instead of the business community saying, you know what, we went too far, or this didn't work out. Basically, the businesses, big multinational companies, are contacting the Biden administration and saying, those tariffs that we have on Chinese product, we should take those off, and we should just get some clarity about our relationship is going to be, because we want to start doing more business with China again. So they're clearly not getting the message here, and I don't think that they have the same recognition of what's at stake. They're just looking at their bottom line.
It's all about the next quarter, Scott. It's always about the next quarter.
Yeah. They don't care about the pollution that's being spewed into the air because of the energy-intensive factories in China, or the Uyghur labor, forced labor that's being employed, or the theft of technology, or anything like that, as long as they can make a buck.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Scott, and we've talked about this before. I don't care about the theft of technology. If they're stupid enough to go over, serious, if they're dumb enough to go over there and hand over their technology, because as I understand, in order to do business in China, you've got to basically hand everything over. So if you were dumb enough to give it to them, I don't know where the surprise when they steal it is.
Right. Yeah. And the theft, just so you know, just so your listeners know, the scale of this is at least $300 billion worth a year of intellectual property. It could be as high as $500 or $600 billion a year. So it is not inconsequential. But you're right. It's like they naively, these multinational companies naively go into this thinking, oh, this, what a great deal we get. We get all this below market labor. We have the Chinese government subsidizing these operations in a lot of different ways. We basically can pollute however we want, and then we can ship things back to the U.S. and we can make a huge margin. Now, if it seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And so they do have to face that intellectual property theft. And then they have to, and as the Chinese government says, you know what, we want those Western companies out now because we have all the technology we need. Thanks very much. Now they're going to protest about it. It's like, come on.
No, you're right.
The time to do that was decades ago.
Yeah, the only thing I'd push back against is I don't see them as naive. I believe they got it. They got exactly what they wanted. They wanted short-term profit gains to line their pockets. They didn't care about American workers. They didn't even care about their products. It was all about how much could they fill into their pockets on the short term. Long term, that's somebody else's problem. And I think they thought the gravy train was never going to end,
No,
even though.
Think you're right about that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think the one thing they thought they were going to get was those billion Chinese consumers, right? And so I think that was what they thought they would get about this. But it turns out the Chinese government wants to boost up its own companies. And so as soon as there's rivals, they're going to push those Western brands out.
No, and that's it. And this is where I'm glad Biden is looking into reshoring manufacturing, some of this stuff. I think we have to do more of this. So last question I've got for you, because somebody's going to throw out, but Scott, the Chinese are subsidizing their companies. Isn't that what we're doing through these incentives?
Well, there's two major differences. One is terms of scale, where the Chinese Communist Party owns many of these firms. They're state-owned, so the U.S. government owns absolutely none of these firms that we're talking about in the United States. Okay, and it's trillions of dollars over 5 or 10 years in China in these industrial subsidies. We're talking about at the most, a couple $100 billion across all the industries here in the United States, from semiconductors to automobiles and clean energy. And so that's not even close. And then the other factor here is that we do invite in and have few restrictions on foreign investment. So you're right. If a Toyota, if a Honda wants to come set up shop in the United States, and they can do that. I hope that we can organize those factories, right? But they can do that. And in China, there's many more restrictions on it. And so the subsidies that it has is for, firms that it deems to be national champions, who it thinks is going to help the Chinese government. And the U.S. essentially does not discriminate.
We don't have any central planning. There's none of that here.
That's right.
That's just not our system. But I'm glad someone's thinking about what we've been talking about on this show for the last 16 years. It's a step in the right direction, and I'm happy to see it. And I'm glad you came and told us. Scott, I appreciate the time, as always. Great stuff.
Of course, Rick. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Good stuff. Our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out their website, AmericanManufacturing.org. He's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1959. The United States Congress had passed the Landrum-Griffin Act. President Eisenhower signed the new law, which was also called the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act. The new law had lasting consequences for the way unions operated. One of the reasons Congress passed the law was alleged abuses of power by some union leaders. The law aimed to protect workers by requiring secret ballots for union elections and protecting freedom of speech within unions. It also required unions to submit annual financial reports to the Department of Labor. While these requirements protected members' rights, not all of the provisions were so positive. The law was passed during the 1950s Red Scare. It required that no one could hold a union-elected leadership position until 5 years after leaving the Communist Party. This part of the law was declared unconstitutional in 1965. The law also expanded the anti-labor provisions of the Taft-Hartley Act. The Taft-Hartley Act prohibited some union activities, such as sympathetic strikes and secondary boycotts. The Landrum-Griffith Act took this all a step further. It tightened the boycott restrictions. It also put limits on the union's ability to picket while organizing for recognition. It placed considerable new federal reporting requirements on the unions. Despite these further restrictions upon labor unions, union workers comprised a third of the total workforce in the United States during the 1950s, the highest percentage of union workers in U.S. history. But the restrictive policies laid out in Taft-Hartley and Landrum-Griffin would help slow and eventually reverse this growth of unionization. Today, less than 12% of U.S. workers are members of unions.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Those in the know say that we the people should forget any progressive fantasy that, at long last, Washington might finally produce the kind of bold FDR-style agenda that America needs. They smugly lecture us that recalcitrant Republicans in Congress, not to mention a swarm of corporate lobbyists, are opposed to progressive change, so who would get it passed? Here's an idea. Try the people themselves. Those in the know don't seem to know it, or don't want us to know it, but big majorities across grassroots America are strongly in favor of the fundamental changes that Washington elites are rejecting. For example, 2/3 of America, including a majority of moderate Republicans, say yes to doubling the minimum wage. 72% of the people, including 46% of professed Republicans, shout their approval for Medicare for all. 8 out of 10 Americans, including strong majorities of Republicans, support a paid family leave program like every other developed nation provides for their people. What about increasing taxes on the rich, expanding Medicaid for poor families, raising teacher pay, spending more for early childhood education? Yes, 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 say majorities, not just in blue states, but also in GOP strongholds like Idaho, Nebraska, and Utah. These are not just poll numbers, but solid ideas embraced last year by a broad cross-section of voters in ballot elections across the country. For example, Florida voters enacted a constitutional initiative to up the state's minimum pay to $15, with yeas topping nays by a whopping margin of more than 20 points, making it even more popular than either Trump or Biden. This is Jim Hightower saying, instead of fearing the people, Democratic leaders need to get out of Washington and join the people. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I love the fact that that CBS News reported last week that had the minimum wage kept up with productivity gains since 1968, the height of the minimum wage would now be like $26 an hour, something like over 50 grand a year. And you go, yeah, we've known that for a long while. Thank you for reporting what we've already known. Thank you for telling us that corporate America has suppressed wages, stopped workers from organizing so that they can't get wage increases. And oh, by the way, lobbied for laws and regulations that allow them to suppress wages even further, especially in service industries. But thanks for telling us what we already know. The reason that they're telling us is because the rest of us have figured this out, and there are people who've had enough of it. And it's about time. I've been calling this for years. I'm here to share some thoughts on the workers who have had enough of it. I've asked Saru Jayaraman to come talk with us. Saru is the president of One Fair Wage, their website, onefairwage.org. Saru, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm looking at this report and I'm going, we've known this. This isn't news, is it?
No, it's absolutely not news, but what I think is the best news ever is that I think workers are finally in the millions waking up to this as well. It's not just those of us who've been talking about it for a long time. It's workers. And maybe they did also know this, but they finally reached a point where they're saying, we are just not going to put up with it anymore.
Especially people in the service industry. It's always amazing to me. And I'll be honest, maybe it's because of me just being an old white guy who would never put up with people's nonsense. But I see some of the stuff that wait staff has to put up and has put up with for years in restaurants, the kind of things that bartenders have had to put up with. And I go, I would never tolerate that kind of behavior. And now we're seeing that behavior that was bad before magnified 100 times worse. It's no wonder people don't want to go back to those jobs, especially with poverty wages.
That's right. I mean, it's almost more incredible if you think about it that people put up with it for this long. You know, this dates back to emancipation. The sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, which is still a ludicrous $2.13 an hour today, is a direct legacy of slavery created at emancipation when the restaurant industry came upon the brilliant idea that they could hire Black workers who were newly freed slaves, not pay them anything, and have them live entirely on tips, which was a mutation of the concept of tipping. Tipping was something that originated in feudal Europe as an extra bonus on top of the wage. It came to the States, and the restaurant industry thought, wow, we can use this new workforce that's come out of emancipation, newly freed, and get them to actually continue with slavery by working for nothing and living completely on tips, mutating the notion of tips from being an extra or bonus on top of a wage to becoming the wage itself.
Yeah.
That was a $0 wage. We went all the way up $2 over 150 years to a $2 wage. And as you said, over that 150-year period, you had a mostly female, very low wage workforce living on $2, putting up with very high rates of sexual harassment and hostility and all kinds of issues for 150 years. It took the pandemic, which really exacerbated those issues. Tips went way down. Sexual harassment and hostility went way up from customers. And workers finally said, it's just not worth it anymore. You don't pay me enough to put up with this level of hostility. And there has been a mass exodus from this industry during the pandemic, leading to thousands of restaurants, including those that have fought this and said they could never do it, that they would shut down if they had to pay this wage. Thousands of restaurants now paying a full wage. I've heard 12, I've heard 13, I've heard 15. I've even heard of restaurants paying $30 an hour because they can't get workers to come for anything less.
Yeah.
And somehow they're still open. Somehow they're managing to survive paying workers a living wage.
It's quite remarkable. But we've got a name for this period. It's the Great Resignation, Saru.
That's right.
Everyone's resigning because look, there are jobs out there. There are options that I think in the past most people didn't think they had. So
right.
When you have options, you're going to take a better one.
I think that's part of it. But I got to tell you, for a lot of our people, it's not like they got unemployment insurance. 2/3 of our workers didn't get unemployment insurance to begin with, because in most states they were told their sub-minimum wage of $2 or $3 was too little to qualify for benefits. So it's not like they were given the option to stay home and do nothing. The other options a lot of people faced were go back to school perhaps. Some went to work for gig companies, Uber, Lyft. Some went to work, for Walmart or warehouses. Some went to work for grocery stores. But so it wasn't like the options were fabulous. But I guess what I'm saying that's so important to note is that workers were basically saying anything else or nothing at all is better than working in this industry. That is an incredible statement for millions of workers to make at once en masse. Essentially, they went on strike and they're saying anything or nothing at all is better than this.
And that's fabulous. It's, again, as someone who's a labor guy, it's something that I've been calling for decades. We need to have this moment. And I think we're looking at the possible reset of the working class to where people finally realize that they have some power and that these employers aren't they're not benevolent dictators, that we can fight against them and we can do better. But I think politics has some of this to do with it as well, because there was a story that I love. Joe Biden was in Ohio, giving a speech back in July. And some restaurant owner asked him about, hey, how are you going to help us get workers back into here? And he basically told them, raise your wages.
That's right. That's right. That's right. We were so thrilled to hear that. Yes.
Brilliant. Who would have thought of it?
He didn't just say that. He actually said, my sister-in-law works as a tipped worker in Atlantic City. She gets what? $7 plus tips. He said people aren't going to put up with that anymore. They want $15 an hour plus tips. So it is wonderful when the president gets it, when they're not buying the rhetoric that these workers are staying home, collecting unemployment insurance. Listen, we just did a massive study of these workers. We surveyed 3,000 workers who are left working in the industry. Mind you, millions left last year. From those that are left, 53% of 3,000 workers said they're leaving. And 80% said the only thing that would make them stay is a livable wage with tips on top. Then, responding to this ludicrous argument that they're staying home collecting unemployment insurance, we looked at states where they had prematurely cut unemployment in order to get workers to go back to work. Guess what we found? An even higher percentage of workers, 57% of workers in those states said, we're leaving, we're not coming back. And over 80% said the only thing that would make me go back is a $15 wage with tips on top. So on the contrary, it is not people staying home collecting unemployment insurance. It is exactly what Joe Biden said. The only way to get people to go back to work in this industry is to actually pay them what they deserve, what they need to live on, and frankly, what they deserve based on their skill and their professionalism. These are workers who served us for the last 150 years, who served us through the pandemic, who allowed us, many of us, to stay home and get delivered delicious meals. These were workers who risked their lives for hospitality and to serve us. And they deserve to be paid a living wage, and they're not going to put up with anything less.
Yeah, but we're in this moment where, some of those economic models that we learned in Economics 101 are coming to play. You can't find workers. The only way that you're going to attract good people to the industry is pay them better wages. And if paying a little bit more doesn't get them, you got to pay a little bit more. That's the world that we're in. And conservatives should be applauding this moment because it's what they tell us they believe and what they tell us how things should work. So it's interesting to me that we're pushing, and trying to guilt people into going into poor wage jobs, especially ones that are poor treatment jobs. It's amazing to me that that's their position at this moment.
Somebody said to me, I thought these people were capitalists. I thought they understood the law of supply and demand. And to call it a labor shortage demonstrates a misunderstanding of supply and demand. Calling these 14 million workers who don't want to work for $2, calling it a labor shortage, somebody wrote a beautiful article saying it's sort of like saying there's a shortage of Mercedes-Benzes for $1,000. There's no shortage of workers. There's a shortage of people willing to work for $2 an hour anymore.
Yeah.
They're just not going to put up with it. And I got to tell you, there are restaurant owners who are leaders of the National Restaurant Association, which is the trade lobby that has lobbied since emancipation to keep these wages as ridiculously low as they are. Unfortunately, Rick, it is the same trade lobby that even some Democrats in the Senate are rolling over to when they are blocking the federal Raise the Wage Act. This is the lobby that is blocking the raise for 32 million Americans in Congress. Well, that trade lobby, many of its own leaders are now paying $13, $14, $15 an hour with tips on top. So I ask you, why do they keep fighting it if they're already paying it? I think many of them believe that they can go back to $2 in a year or so when things die down.
Yep.
And this is where they are so wrong, so mistaken. There has never been a time in U.S. history when employers have managed to roll back wages from 15 to 2 or that. It's just not going to happen. Either we raise the wage or we cut this industry in half because half the workers have left or are leaving.
Yeah, I don't know on a grand scale, but I do know that during the Clinton years, the fast food industry was paying like $10 an hour at the time. And when Bush took office, they somehow got that back down to the minimum wage. So they were able to claw some back. Because one of the arguments that I'm making to people is, fine, your employer is giving you, $18, $20 an hour. Amazon just announced they're raising their starting wage to $18 an hour because they can't get anyone. I say right now is the time that you organize, you unionize, and you get that in writing.
That's right.
Once you put it in a contract.
Let's unionize, or let's get laws on the books to say this is the permanent wage going forward, and it's going to be indexed so that it keeps rising with average wage growth.
Right.
Not with inflation, but with average wage growth. So we need both. We absolutely need unions, and we absolutely need federal policy change to make sure everybody in the United States has a floor below which we are not going to go, and we're not going to go back. And this is why I got to tell you, I have a lot of restaurant owners who work with us. Some are saying I've raised my wages and I am able to find workers. Some are saying I've raised my wages and I still can't get workers to come back. And they have joined us in calling for the federal bill to pass because they're saying, listen, I can't do it alone. I need the federal government to pass this law, to create a level playing field. So Denny's and IHOP are also paying 15, not just me, small business restaurant owner, but also to send a signal to millions of workers that this is permanent change. It's not temporary. It's permanent change. Wages are going up, and it's worth coming back to work in restaurants.
Yeah, but again, I come back to my view, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think having a union in the workplace gives workers empowerment so that you never have to go back to the conditions. And I'll be honest, my daughter went into the restaurant industry for a very short period of time, and I'm glad that she was one of the people who did the Great Resignation and is doing something else, because I didn't want the kind of treatment for her that she encountered. Because she had no voice. She was powerless in that job other than to go, I quit, I'm not doing it. So for me, having that ability to stand up and speak out and not be fearful of being fired, to me, that's all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree. It's both and. It's why the Fight for 15 slogan has been 15 and a union. It's just that, Rick, there are millions of workers. We're not going to be able to help all of them unionize immediately. And so we do need the policy to set the floor, and then we need to organize everybody to have a union on top of that.
So let me ask you this, because now I have found no one who thinks $2.13 an hour on the federal level is sane, is rational, is livable. In Pennsylvania, I think it's like $2.86 an hour, something marginally better. I know no one who thinks that that's enough. How do we get to a place where we make it on par with minimum wage, and we raise the wage to somewhere near the sane level, which again, I think tying it to productivity, not a bad idea, especially since CBS News is saying it'd be $26 an hour today.
That's right. Well, the first thing we need everybody's help with is that there are 8 Democrats in the Senate, Democrats that have voted no on the federal Raise the Wage Act, which would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and end the subminimum wage for tipped workers and end the subminimum wage for workers with disabilities. That bill, yes, there are 42 Democrats who voted yes, but there are 8 Senate Democrats who voted no, and we need to keep pushing on them because they are listening to the National Restaurant Association, not to their own constituents who overwhelmingly, whether they're Republican or Democratic, you can poll people in America, they overwhelmingly support raising the minimum wage and ending the subminimum wage for tipped workers. You're right. Nobody disagrees except for the elected officials, like these 8 Democrats, and their cronies in the National Restaurant Association. So we need help pushing on Senator Shaheen and Hassan in New Hampshire, Senators Tester in Montana, Senators Carper and Coons in Delaware, Senator King in Maine, and of course, Senator Manchin and Sinema, who are just kind of standing up for the Restaurant Association rather than their own constituents.
And this is the stuff that drives me crazy about Democrats, because Democrats are supposed to be the party of the working people. Look, I get when Republicans say that we should have no minimum wage laws, we should have no maximum hour laws. Hell, we got Madison Cawthorn coming out saying he wants to gut OSHA. I expect that from Republicans. I don't expect that from Democrats.
Well, and I think beyond us not expecting it, I think all of the millions of people who turned out to vote in very large numbers last year in Georgia and Michigan and Pennsylvania, if they don't see some real change in their lives, in their economic situation, it's going to be very hard for us to say, please come back out to vote in 22 or 24.
Yep.
I mean, restaurant workers had a 12% voter turnout rate before 2020. We mobilized thousands of them to vote on this issue with the expectation that Joe Biden and the Democrats would deliver. If they don't, I really fear that we will lose the Senate and the House in 22. And so even if you don't care about these workers or their wages, if you care about democracy, if you care about making sure Donald Trump doesn't come back into office, if you care about voting rights or anything else, we have to deliver on the things that we said we were going to do as Democrats.
No, I absolutely do not disagree with you on that. Saru, let me ask you a last question, and kind of a sideball. Madison Cawthorn, the representative from North Carolina, tweeted out that he's going to put forth a bill to gut OSHA. A visceral reaction, thought? That's probably the right one.
I mean, Republicans, if they took control, would take us back to the Stone Age, as we know, where workers have no protections, no minimum wage whatsoever. I've been debating people on radio shows like this who say we shouldn't have a minimum wage at all, no protections. I mean, they really would have us return to slavery, Rick. They really would have us return to slavery, because that is when a worker has no protections and barely any wage. What other name can you give it? What other name can you give it when you don't actually pay for your workers' labor, nor do you provide any protections? There's no other name. What they're asking us to do is to regress back 150 years to a time when we had no worker protections. And it's totally so tone deaf and out of step with their own constituents who are in this moment saying, we're not going to work for these jobs under these conditions.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Saru, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks for the work that you guys do. I appreciate it. Hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good stuff. Saru Jayaraman. Make sure you check out their website, onefairwage.com. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day Illinois Governor Frank Loudon hoped to meet with striking streetcarmen in an effort to end their strike. Transit workers in Springfield, the state's capital, had been off the job since July 25th. But the strike had gained so much support that Springfield had now erupted into a full-blown general strike. According to the Sangamon County Historical Society, thousands of union members shut down mines, railroads, bakeries, restaurants, laundries, and construction sites following the violent crackdown of a pro-labor march by state police and militia. The march had been scheduled for September 9th. The union hoped to show support for the striking streetcarmen after a number of clashes between strikers and state militia. After they were denied a permit, many of the 50 or so unions decided to march anyway and were attacked. Some were shot. More than 40 suffered bayonet-inflicted injuries. By the 11th, most everyone in Springfield had walked off the job. Striking women shoe factory workers stopped a streetcar, pulling the scab drivers off by force. By the end of the week, as many as 12,000 members of 34 unions in the city were on strike. When telephone operators walked off the job, they paralyzed communications of the scab streetcar drivers and the state National Guardsmen. The streetcar strikers refused to meet with the governor until troops were withdrawn from the city. The governor insisted disloyal, pro-German forces were at fault for the labor troubles. By the 16th, the streetcarmen agreed to negotiate and the general strike was called off. But the company refused to meet striker demands for recognition and higher wages, or even take them back. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said in the last segment, Amazon, they're looking to raise their starting hourly rate to $18 an hour. They need to hire 125,000 workers for the big rush that's about to come. They're saying in some places that wage could go up to $22.50 an hour. Now remember, just a couple years ago they went to 15, and this is the free market thing. This is capitalism, deciding. In order to get people to come and stay and work in bad conditions, you have to entice them with something. And look, I've met a lot of people who, especially people who are used to working for minimum wage and just above. The reason you're not getting people to go back to restaurants is because a lot of these warehouses are popping up and they're paying what to the folks who are taking these jobs, money that they've never seen before, the kind of wages that change their lives. But in my view, still not wages that you can support a family on and live on long term. Now, these folks, look, they're thrilled. My problem is, and I go back to something Saru said that I don't know that I quite agree with. I do believe that they're going to claw some of this stuff back as we get further away from this pandemic. I do believe they're going to do their darndest to take some of that back, like they did in the late 90s. I remember the McDonald's down the street from our house in Allentown. I was paying $10 an hour to their full-time people. And within a year after W took over, it was down to, what was that, $5.45 or whatever it was at the time. They were able to claw that much back. Basically what they did is they let go all the people they were paying decent wages to, the $10 an hour to, and they hired new people at the lower wage. That is what's going to happen. That's what happens in a lot of these warehouses. You see these big giant warehouses. People don't actually work for the company that the warehouse is. They work for a logistics company, a third party, so that at the end of a contract, they go, well, your costs are too much. We're going to bring in someone cheaper. And they fire everybody and they bring in a new company, and you can reapply lower wages, less benefits. You know the drill. This is where we need comprehensive labor law reform in the worst way, because we need to start holding some of these companies accountable. Now, the good thing about 2020, pandemic horrible, all the stuff that went on terrible, but the poverty rate actually fell in 2020. Overall, the poverty rate fell, and that they're saying that had to do with the fact that there were stimulus checks that went out. There was a little bit of money that went into people's pockets that helped them stay just above the poverty rate. And this is one of those arguments that I get people making to me all the time on why we need to have guaranteed minimum income. We need to have universal basic income, whatever you want to call it. But we need someone to get everyone to get a little bit of money every month to help them to make it through. And I'm not horribly opposed to the idea. Like right now, they're handing out $250 per kid above the age of 6, $300 bucks per kid under the age of 6. That's making sure that kids aren't in poverty. There's food on the table. I think that's not a bad policy. I think it's something, if we want to encourage people to have children, and look, my white God-fearing Christian folk friends, you should be pushing for this. The guy who told me the other day that the reason there aren't enough white babies around is because 1, abortion, and 2, we can't afford them. Maybe a little help. Maybe move some health care, some education, some stuff to help people survive. That might encourage people to want to have children, other than passing laws to force them. Just seems a little sane and rational to me. But we're in this weird kind of moment. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You got any questions, comments, something on your mind? Love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Should we raise the minimum wage, or should we keep the poverty wage? Because $2.13 goes a long way. I don't know where, but it goes a long way. Love to hear your thoughts. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Forecasters say the storm could dump up to 20 inches of rain over some parts of the Gulf Coast this week.
Second monster storm in 2 weeks drowns the U.S. Gulf Coast.
When we build back, we have to build back better. It's not a Democrat thing. It's not a Republican thing. It's a weather thing.
Biden urges Congress to invest in hardening the nation's infrastructure. Plus, another nail in the coffin for the massive zombie Pebble Mine in Alaska.
All of those coffins and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You know, we can't continue to try to ignore reality.
Oh, Mr. President, as Barack Obama used to say, yes, we can. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Tessie Doyen, yet another monster storm and yet another record hurricane season is yet again knocking out power across Texas and Louisiana.
Yes, as we go to air, Tropical Storm Nicholas is bringing days of heavy rain and dangerous flash floods to areas of Texas and storm-battered Louisiana. States of emergency are in effect. Widespread power outages are reported in Texas, again, after the ice storm earlier this year. Flights canceled and schools are closed. The National Hurricane Center warns that Nicholas is a slow-moving rainmaker that could dump as much as 20 inches of rain on some parts of the Gulf Coast.
20 inches of rain.
Yes, and that compounds storm surge with inland flooding. Inland flooding is the leading cause of storm-related deaths. Beleaguered Louisiana is still struggling to recover from a direct hit by Category 4 Hurricane Ida just 2 weeks ago. Studies show that human-caused climate change is making storms more severe, producing more rainfall, moving slower once they make landfall, and generating larger storm surges along the coast.
None of which is good news.
It's a busy week on Capitol Hill as Democrats hash out key pillars of President Biden's climate agenda in his Build Back Better proposal to create jobs, upgrading the nation's infrastructure, and shifting to clean energy.
That would be good.
It's part of the Democrats' $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation legislation that can pass with a simple majority over an expected Republican filibuster. The bill also includes funding for lead pipe removal, fees for methane leaks, transmission upgrades, and EV charging infrastructure. And under negotiation right now is a potentially game-changing policy called the Clean Electricity Performance Program, or CEPP, to incentivize utilities to accelerate the shift to clean energy. A new report from independent firm Analysis Group finds that if Congress passes the Clean Electricity Performance Program, it would create nearly 8 million new jobs and add nearly $1 trillion to the economy by 2031.
That's a good thing if we could just get that message across to Joe Manchin, who really doesn't seem to like any of this stuff.
President Biden visited the wildfire-ravaged states of California and Idaho on Monday to bolster firefighting efforts and promote his Build Back Better proposal. At the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho, and then again in California, Biden emphasized that man-made climate change is here and the nation needs to prepare now for worse effects to come, noting that last year alone, extreme weather cost the U.S. $99 billion.
The reality is we have a global warming problem. It's not like you can build back to what it was before. It's not going to get any better than it is today. It only can get worse. For every dollar we invest in resilience, that is building back better, we save $6 down the road in the future. When we build back, we have to build back better. It's not a Democrat thing. It's not a Republican thing. It's a weather thing.
Actually, it's a climate thing, Mr. President, but we'll let you go on that one.
Some good news. The Biden Environmental Protection Agency says it will establish the first ever rules limiting the industrial dumping of toxic chemicals known as PFAS into public water systems or directly into rivers, lakes, and surface waters.
Tyrant.
PFAS are linked to a host of health impacts like cancers and birth defects. EPA will also establish new rules limiting wastewater discharges from slaughterhouses into rivers, like the Smithfield Hog Processing Plant in North Carolina, which alone dumps more than 1 million pounds of pollutants a year directly into the Cape Fear River.
Well, so much for freedom.
Finally, the Biden EPA has also put another nail in the coffin of the extremely controversial Pebble Mine, a truly massive open-pit gold and copper mine proposed in Alaska, which the EPA's studies have shown would irreversibly harm the world's largest sockeye salmon fishery in Alaska's pristine Bristol Bay watershed. The Biden EPA has asked a federal court to allow it to reopen its proposed veto of the mine under the Clean Water Act.
Well, let's hope this one sticks for a while. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the fate of California is hanging in the balance. I don't believe the polls have closed just yet out there, but the counting should begin. And look, the fate of the country could hang in the balance as well, depending on what happens in this recall. Now, some of the polling looks pretty good. Pretty good. My only guarantee in this is the former guy and his ilk, no matter what happens, is going to claim the whole thing was rigged and Democrats cheated. That's the only thing I can guarantee. But here to share some thoughts on what's going on the ground, on what this recall could mean to the good folks of California, I've asked my good friend Steve Smith to come talk with us. Steve's the communication director there at the California Labor Federation, CaliforniaLabor.com, their website. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be on the show again, Rick.
So walk me through what are we seeing at this moment? What's going on?
Well, I'll tell you, over the last month or so, we have had the largest field campaign in the history of California labor working to defeat this recall. And I'll have to tell you, Rick, it turned the tide. We were back about a month and a half ago. Things were a dead heat. Now we're looking at a 10 or 15 point cushion for the governor of California. So that all comes down to people getting on the streets, knocking on doors, talking to voters, making sure they know what the stakes are. We've done that, I think, to incredible effect here in California. And I think we're going to see those results tonight.
I hope so, and we'll see what happens as everything gets counted. I had a listener ask me the other day, though, why is this happening? Why are they trying to recall the governor? The response that someone gave me was, look, the guy's just trying to do his job, trying to keep people safe. Is this something worthy of recall? So why do you think why is this going on?
Well, there's two reasons. One, like everywhere else, we have Trump Republicans in the state of California. And they are adamantly against any sort of COVID protections for workers or anybody else. So that was a big part of it. Now, we don't have a lot of them, but unfortunately, in California, we have the second lowest threshold to put a recall on the ballot in the entire country. So it doesn't take a whole lot. They only had to get 1.5 million signatures, and they actually got an extension to get those signatures because of the pandemic. So one of the things we're going to be looking at right after this campaign is over is reforming our system so taxpayers aren't having to put down $300 million to pay for a wasteful, frankly, stupid recall like we're having right now.
No, it's crazy. But here's the weird thing. There's part of me that goes, the messaging that comes out of this is, maybe you're not even defending Newsom as much as you're looking at someone like Larry Elder, who seems to be just insane. This is a guy who said that if we paid reparations to former slaves, we'd have to pay the slave owners too, which is just weird. Here's a guy who said we shouldn't have a minimum wage. This is a guy who's way out on the fringe, or no, wait a second, right dead smack in the middle of the Republican Party today.
Yeah, he's California's version of Donald Trump in just about every way. Look, he has a long history of public statements, being a talk radio show host, and all of those statements have come out. And our challenge here was not persuading people how to vote. It was getting people engaged, making sure that they do vote. And Larry Elder and the things that he said and the attacks on workers certainly helped to that end.
So let me ask you this now. Now, hopefully tomorrow you put this behind the state. You start moving forward on doing things that need to get done, like making sure that we have safe working conditions for people as they have to continue to go to work, especially in this era of the pandemic. We fight for better wages. What you guys do, wages, hours, conditions. We get back to that and we push for laws that are gonna help do that, because this to me has been a massive distraction from actually governing and making people's lives better.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We are in California like to pride ourselves on being the national leader in terms of the protections of workers that we've put in place over decades. All those protections, all those benefits for working people in this state were at risk, unfortunately, with this recall. So we had to mobilize to stop it. Now, was it a distraction? Of course, but that didn't stop us from making sure every single worker in the state of California has paid sick leave while this COVID pandemic is going on. It didn't stop us from pushing the strongest bill in the nation to hold Amazon accountable, which we just passed in the legislature. And it's not only is it not going to stop us from doing those things in the future, I think we emerge from this even stronger. We have mobilized tens of thousands of volunteers who are ready to push even harder for better wages, for better jobs, for better health and safety in the state of California. And this campaign, that's been the silver lining, is the engagement that we've seen from tens of thousands of workers, and so many of them ready to do even more after this is over.
Yeah, earlier in the hour we had Saru Jayaraman from One Fair Wage on the program talking about the Great Resignation, how people aren't going back to the food service industry. They're not going back into these service jobs that historically have been poverty wage jobs because a plethora of reasons. But one, they're not going to put up with the desperation wages and the horrible conditions. Are you finding that across your economy? Because I'm looking at all of the talk of the Great Resignation and nobody wants to work and all of the shaming that's going on, and I'm looking at it as I think most working people have finally woken up to the reality that they've been getting the shaft all these years, and that they actually in this moment have a little bit of power.
Yeah, we agree 100%. The only reason there's a worker shortage is because there's a shortage of bosses paying a living wage. And that's what it comes down to. That's our message. Fortunately, in California, that's our legislators' message. That's our governor's message. And that's why it's so important that, we not only defeat this recall, but we absolutely crush it. And I hope the results tonight show that we did.
Yeah. So when will we know? I mean, the voting, I think, ends here relatively short period of time. A lot of mail-in ballots, a lot of counting that's going to happen. When do you think we'll have a decision or an outcome here?
Well, it depends. The one thing we look for is LA County returns to come in, and those are typically a little later than other parts of the state. But we could see those coming in 10, 11 o'clock tonight. And if the governor is moving toward a landslide, you could potentially see the race called tonight. But there's a lot of votes that need to be counted. This was an all-mail ballot. Everybody got a ballot in the mail, I should say. They could return it in person today, which many did. So we'll have to see. But there is a possibility after those LA County returns come in this evening that we could see the race called.
Yeah, because at some point math actually does matter. But I fully expect Larry Elder to come out and pull the Donald Trump. I won because right now the votes that haven't been counted don't matter. Like Trump did here in Pennsylvania on election night, he was up like 600,000 votes because they didn't count the other half of the state's votes yet. I fully expect that, and I fully expect the elders and the Trumps and the rest of them to claim that the whole thing was stolen, the whole thing was rigged, and you did it, Steve. It's all your fault.
That's right. No, we fully expect that as well. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump released a statement yesterday saying that the election was rigged and complaining before even one vote has been counted here in the state of California, before polls were even closed. This is standard with the Trump playbook. Larry Elder has been playing his game with that playbook. So yeah, we expect that. But in California, we run a very tight ship in terms of elections. We have tremendous folks running our elections here in California. And I don't think that any of these claims have a bit of credence to them or are going to cause anybody to take a second look at our results.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Steve Smith. He's the communications director for the California Federation of Labor, or Labor Federation. CaliforniaLabor.org is their website. We'll get links out on social media, how you can check that out. Let me take you to the other side of this for a second. Let's say that, the governor's recalled. Let's say that happens. And the polling that I'm looking at, it's a slim possibility. But, looking into the crystal ball, someone like Larry Elder in the governor's mansion, how bad could things get for working people? And are there any safeguards that would stop him from completely turning California into a right-wing wet dream haven?
Yeah, well, we have a Democratic legislature, a supermajority of Democrats, in fact, in both houses of our legislature. But that in and of itself is not a sufficient backstop, because the governor has broad authority through executive order, through line item vetoes that he can do with our state budget. Look, things would have gone to hell in a handbasket very quickly if Larry Elder were to prevail. That's why we took this campaign so seriously from the beginning. We were not going to allow that to happen. We are not going to allow that to happen. In fact, it's 7:46 right now, and there are still people knocking on doors 14 minutes before in the state of California. That's how seriously we took this threat.
No, and good, because the rest of the country is looking to you to not screw this up. Because look, the fate of California, as California goes, the rest of the country could as well. Because if, let's say, something were to happen to Dianne Feinstein and you've got Larry Elder to appoint her replacement, that's bad.
Absolutely. Would flip the entire Senate to Mitch McConnell. Again, you can't overstate how important this election was. At the beginning, when we did our research, people didn't understand that. People didn't understand how important a recall election could be to the future of workers, to their future, to their families' future. That's the work that we actually had to put in to ensure that we got the right result tonight. So I certainly hope we're not going to have to ponder what to do in that case, Rick, but I think we've done the work necessary to make sure that's not going to happen.
I hope you have. I think you have. The polling numbers bear that out. But I hope I don't wake up tomorrow going, oh my gosh. But I know, at least I know that in the event that happens, you guys will be there to fight and protect working people in California and across the country as well. Steve, I appreciate the time, the work that you do. Thanks for the update and letting us know what's going on there.
Thank you so much for having me, Rick. Always a pleasure.
Good stuff. Our good friend Steve Smith. Make sure you check out their website, CaliforniaLabor.org. We'll get links out on social media. Steve Smith, the communication director there at the California Labor Federation. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1929. That was the day that Ella Mae Wiggins was gunned down on her way to a rally of striking textile workers in North Carolina. Ella Mae was born in the mountains of Tennessee. Her father was a lumberjack who was killed on the job. She and her brother had entered the textile mills to help support their family. She married another mill employee and they had 7 children. When her husband left, Ella Mae struggled to keep her family afloat. When the Great Depression came, textile mill workers were subject to the, quote, stretch out. Owners demanded that fewer workers quicken their pace to produce the same results. In response, textile workers began to organize and strike in Gaston County, the heart of the Southern textile industry. Ella Mae became a local leader of the National Textile Workers Union. She advocated for organizing both white and black workers. She became known for leading the other workers in song. One of her most poignant songs was the Mill Mother's Lament. The lyrics told her personal struggle of a mother trying to support her children. On the day she was killed, Ella Mae was in a truck heading to the workers' rally. They were met by an armed mob deployed by the mill owners. The unarmed workers turned their truck around, but the mob chased them and gunned down Ella Mae. 5 people were charged, but they were acquitted of her murder.
We leave our homes in the morning, we kiss our children goodbye. While we slave for the bosses, our children scream and cry.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Our grocery bills to pay, not a cent to spend for clothing, not a cent to lay.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some good stuff coming out of the Democrats' budget bill. And, you know, I think it's what we need. And this is why I'm so ripped off at people like Joe Manchin. There's so much in here that would benefit working people in this country. Because we've been sold this idea for 40 plus years that we need to give more and more to the wealthy. We need to give tax break after tax break after tax break, subsidies, you name it. We have created the largest billionaire class in the history of humanity. And how have we done that? Well, we've done that by taking lower wages, getting used to paying for our own health care, getting used to not having retirement security. And when they do give us something, it's generally peanuts. Here, you can have this defined contribution plan where if you put in $1, we'll match it with, something up to only a certain percent. And most working people can't afford to put money away, which is why the average 401k in this country has got like 18 grand in it. Sorry, but you're not going to retire on 18 grand. And that's not happening. Maybe for the last 6 months of your life, but not much longer than that. And we've done all of this. The sacrificing, look what we've done to our kids. We've saddled a generation with massive debt. Told them the only way they were going to get into the middle class was by taking on a lifetime of student loan debt because they had to have skin in the game. And all it's done is taken money out of the commons, the things that we used to do for all of us, and handed it to a few. And that was what it was designed to do. Reaganomics worked perfectly, exactly as it was supposed to. Now, the sales pitch that they gave the rest of us, the people who believe that, it makes sense. If I give the rich guy, if I give the boss all the money and all the power, he'll share it. That's what they sold us. And the really incredible part, we bought it. Well, not we. An entire political party on one side of the aisle and a good portion of the other. You look at what's happened in this country over the last 40 years, and look, working people were right. No, we can't have free trade agreements with desperate nations. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to compete with a country that's paying, a 20th of the wage that workers here are making. It doesn't make any sense to deal with desperate nations who are using energy and environmental regulations from 100 years ago. It doesn't make any sense to put yourself in that kind of desperation competition, because you're going to lose every time. And I know we love to think we're exceptional. We love to think we're the best, most productive, all of that stuff. But I'm telling you right now, you're not going to outproduce 100 people. No matter how efficient you are, no matter how big and strong and how hard you work, ain't happening. And they know that, which is why I'm glad to see the Democrats are actually doing something in this budget reconciliation bill to help working people. Some things on the organizing front, like new fines to impose on people who break labor laws. Give the NLRB an opportunity to have some bite when a company breaks the law. Ending captive audience meetings during union organizing campaigns. Protecting the idea of an economic strike. Because right now, if you go on strike for economic reasons, they can permanently replace you, which is why it never happens. Which is why you go, well, what are you on strike for? Well, mostly working conditions. The vast majority of strikes today are about working conditions. People are tired of working 12, 14, 16, 20 hours a day. You don't hear them go, no, we're on strike because we haven't gotten a raise in 10 years. Because they can't say that, because they'll get fired. Because that's how screwed up our labor laws are. So they're doing something about that. They're doing some stuff about misclassification. They're doing some stuff to hike OSHA penalties while you've got Madison Cawthorn going, no, we're going to gut OSHA. There's a lot of stuff in this bill that Joe Manchin and the rest of them are trying to strangle. There's a lot in here that's going to help average everyday working people actually get ahead. And this is why I'm really happy with Joe Biden at this moment, and which is why the moneyed interests are not. Which is why the moneyed interests are spending so much time, energy, and money to derail his agenda, because they know they're going to have to pay for it. And look, they've had it good for so long. They've had everything handed to them. They've been able to do whatever they've ruled the roost. And yet, we keep being pitted against one another, and we do it to ourselves. I can't get that Jay Gould quote out of my head. I could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. In this pandemic, we're literally seeing that playing out. They've convinced half the working class, no, don't get vaccinated. It's your birthright to infect other people. It's your birthright to go breathe on someone's neck in a grocery store. It's insane. But it's what they've played on, and it's what they've funded. I look at this recall in California. The moneyed interests want that because they know chaos is good for them. Here in Pennsylvania, I'm seeing signs all over the place. Unmask our children. We want to see their pretty smiles. Beautiful signs. Someone paid to print those. Paid to print a lot of them. And they're all over the place. And not one of them were printed probably by a worker making a decent living. This is one of those moments where we, the working class of this country, have got to come around to some bit of sanity. Because all of this stuff is being thrown at us to keep us divided, to keep us pitted against each other. I railed about the baby boomers yesterday who were whining in the meeting I was in because, no one's, doing anything to organize, and, no one's doing anything. No, there are people out there doing it. It's just that your generation allowed the laws to get so badly battered, voted for Republican politicians who put people on the courts who gutted our labor laws. This is the problem that we're in, and this is the end of the road. Now, look, I've often said, unions did too good of a job. Unions did such a good job that they convinced their members that they're the elite wealth class, that tax cuts are their interest. when all they got were pennies in the last several tax cuts, as were our wealth class. They lined the pockets full. And never shall a coin hit the floor. But in this, you finally got an administration that's going, no, we've got to use policy to encourage collective bargaining. We've got to use policy to protect workers. We got to use the power of government to ensure that we have an economy that works for everybody. That seems sane to me. It seems rational to me. And it seems like something we should be pushing for, which is why contact your senator, contact your representative. Let them know what you think about this. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show on Twitter. Like us on Facebook. Go to the YouTubes and subscribe. Give us a like. Lots of ways to participate. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where we're